welcome to the show, gentlemen. We are live on the internet to some people who are awake here right now doing their thing, and then back again a bit later on. All right, so Squads, Metaplex, very, very, very interesting products, infrastructure that just seem to be right at the center of all of the exciting things that are happening right now. I've known you guys, investors. I've been at conversations multiple times before. As I was preparing for this conversation, I was like, what is, you guys have made so many changes over the last little while, because I think of the shift in the market generally. I'm very curious how you're describing what you are doing right now, because I worry I'm going to get it wrong. So Stepan, maybe I'll go to you first if you want to maybe introduce yourself and articulate this positioning of, I mean, if you go to your website, brother, you got a lot going on there. And I see you're even wearing a shirt that doesn't say Squads on it, but says something else.
It's not just a multi-sig anymore.
Correct. Yeah, we've been evolving. But yeah, thanks so much for having me. My name is Stepan. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Squads. Actually, the description evolved in the last couple of years. That's true. Today, we would like to talk about the company as a infrastructure and services layer for the stablecoin economy. And we have multiple products. We build a bunch of different infrastructure that makes Solana companies more secure, starting from the multisig. And today we have Altitude that we're representing at Breakpoint as kind of the flagship product, which is essentially a business account to run your financial operations entirely on stablecoin rails, again powered by our infrastructure. We have a consumer entry point to what we're building, which is Fuse, our consumer app. And we have Grid, which sort of powers it all, right? Which is this API layer that exists between the complexity of blockchain and our products, and hopefully soon will power a lot of other fantastic, stablecoin neobanks and other financial.
So that is what his website says, basically.
I mean, has this always been the vision? And you saw like multi-sigs as kind of a wedge into that, or through your multi-sig kind of early product, you saw this opportunity emerge?
I think with multisig, once we got to a certain place and we realized that majority of Solana teams and companies and a lot of institutions that are coming into the ecosystem, they're relying on the multisig as the core infrastructure to secure and manage their on-chain assets. We started seeing how they actually use the product, and a lot of them were using it as a de facto business bank account.
Right.
They would run payroll, they would pay vendors, contractors, and earn yield.
Us too, yeah.
And that prompted us to build Altitude. That prompted us to realize that stable coins are here to stay, maybe a bit earlier than the market. And there's also like an anecdotal thing where we actually still don't have a bank account. We never had one, right? And so we started from Safe, then we built Squads. Now we use both, right? We still have some EVM multisigs as well. And so yeah, I think that's it was kind of a natural progression, realizing that when you combine performance of Solana, security of Squads, and the programmability of stablecoins, you can actually build a very alternative way to run your financial ops.
Yeah, so I think stablecoins, big meta. I think tokens, launching tokens, generally the other big one. So first, I want to thank you for sponsoring this endeavor. Of
course,
obviously. We put the money to good use, baby. Look at us.
It looks
here
incredible.
Good,
you guys
right?
look like money. This is incredible. I love it.
We're trying to attract more, my friend. It's just going to come in here. So, I mean, same question to you. I think we chatted last time a couple of months ago, kind of around Genesis. It was ahead of a couple token launches that were happening there. Catch us up on what you guys have been focused on.
Yeah, absolutely. So Metaplex, for those that aren't familiar, is the standard for creating and launching tokens and NFTs on the Solana blockchain. And we've had a chance to build with incredible teams and founders, since 2021, from NFTs to meme coins to DeFi to now the ICM era with tokenized securities and IP. This is actually the first time Stepan and I are meeting, but we've been using Squads to run Metaplex and the Metaplex Foundation for years. It's actually, this year was the first time we ever opened a bank account, and it was like for some nice to haves. Like, we've been able to completely run the protocol just using that on-chain technology and having really trusted infrastructure to do that. And I think for anyone who's used Squads, like, you can tell just the polish and the details. It's really like an exceptional product. And I think that that overlap is, how can you decentralize the core infrastructure of the internet and the modern economy and be able to have token-based governance and teams that are able to collaborate at scale through these decentralized systems. And so with Genesis, our launch protocol, our ICO protocol, that's really the beginning of the journey. You are launching your token, you're setting the right base for the community, but then you actually have to get to work. Like, obviously you want to launch your token having shown traction and having a real product and vision to build on. But then that really in many ways is just the start for that next chapter. And so having infrastructure that allows you to then run an organization with the right incentives and to collaborate at scale becomes that missing piece.
You say obviously, but based on the conversations we've had around this table this week, it is not obvious that you want to have a product live and sort of have a sort of traction. There seems to be a reasonable debate around the timing of when to launch a token. So maybe just hearing your answer there, I will kind of know where you're going with this. But I'm curious about, your just general position, thoughts on when to launch a token and how that's sort of informed the product that you're building.
Right. It's a good question. Like you don't want, like when I think launching the token, I actually think oftentimes like the SAFs are launching tokens. So for those that aren't familiar, like those are like paper docs that you set up with private investors where they're giving exposure to the token. And so actually the state of the art is that you're giving large chunks of the token to a very limited audience of large, investors and funds, and the community then comes later. And oftentimes when those tokens launch at really high valuations, then you end up in this kind of down-only environment. And now I think you've missed the core opportunity of tokenization, which is to really align your incentives with the people and the consumers and the creators that are driving value to that technology. Like that's the promise in my view, is that the people that are actually the end users that are driving value to the systems have an opportunity to contribute and be part of the success of those projects as they grow.
Yeah. So, okay, Stepan, I'm very interested in this sort of evolution from, we talked about it from sort of from multisig, which is sort of serving the early market that was there. I think, there's very crypto native teams. There's a lack of tooling. What we're seeing right now is sort of this explosion in, it seems like more institutions are interested in crypto today than the actual retail traders. So I don't think that will persist forever. I think tokens, I'm with you on sort of like the excitement around tokens, but I'm very curious about the evolution from your point of view. Like clearly the products that you're building right now are recognizing this next sort of wave of adoption, but what has that process been like, and how have you sort of built conviction to be well positioned for this wave?
I think it's we have seen this evolution naturally, right? In terms of like who comes through the door, right? When they even try to get onboarded to Squad's multisig, because it started with just very crypto native, like very early stage teams that would come to Solana, and again, there was absolutely no tooling around, like you mentioned, and then today, like we're interfacing with some of the largest institutions, in the world that are thinking about issuing assets on chain, that are looking to do essentially tokenization of their vaults, different automations and interactions, throughout DeFi in a way that actually, gives them the security and reliability they're looking for. And so when we even started in crypto in 2021, there was a lot of like sayings, everybody was saying institutional grade infrastructure, which I think it was a meme at the time, but we are actually now in a place where a lot of this infrastructure is actually institutional grade because real institutions are actually using it now. And it's still, I think there's still a lot more work we need to do, right? And I think a lot of these institutions that we're interfacing with this year, for a lot of them, it's kind of pilot programs, they're trying things. But I think also seeing the shift from saying I can only do things from QC, I can only use Anchorage or Coinbase custody, now to saying I actually do want to do things in DeFi that actually QC prevents me from doing things the way I want to essentially run my fund. That is, I think, the most interesting shift we're seeing, where there's kind of a lot more will to go deeper into the crypto ecosystem and interact with it.
I think your website is one of the few that I see being positioned, or at least a product being positioned directly for CFOs.
Right.
I mean, that stood out to me, which it's kind of crazy. If you're not deep in crypto, like that shouldn't be something that stands out. But for me, sitting there seeing that, my assumption is that you see a big enough market of these companies that have chief financial officers to come and use your product.
That's a great question. So I think when we built Squad's multisig, we originally focused on CEOs, and the first iteration we sold to them. And we failed miserably because then they would bring the CTOs who didn't care about the product we built. They cared about, is it formally verified? Is it immutable? How many times was it audited? And all those things. And so we rebuilt the program from scratch and kind of focused on the very different things. And now we understand that multisig is a kind of developer first product, right? And when we started talking to the CFOs in a lot of these companies, once they actually launched tokens, set up foundations, these would be Cayman directors who never touched a ledger.
Right.
And they were like, look, I just can't, multisig is great, but I can't use it. There's just too much going on. That's actually what led us to build Altitude, because we wanted to abstract away as much of that as possible and to say, there's no crypto knowledge assumed when you're coming into the product. And that's what Altitude is, where you log in with an email, everything is dollars and euros, and you can do stablecoin transfer, you can do regular payments. There's familiar sources of yield, there's DeFi sources of yield that you can explore as well. And so I think that is, we're definitely seeing a lot more demand from generally using stablecoin focused products by more traditional organizations and businesses. Still on Altitude today, the majority of customers are crypto native, and majority of them are Solana operators. But we are seeing corporate services providers from offshore jurisdictions. We're seeing merchants that are selling stuff online. We're seeing inflow of actual businesses that are exploring what it means for them to use stablecoins in today's world.
Yeah, Stepan, I'm interested in how you're thinking about this transition from, I guess, hoodies to suits, as Tolly called it for us. We see a bunch of people who are running at the launch pad or ICO opportunity, but really focusing more on tokenized equity or legal structuring in preparation for what comes next. It seems like you guys are really targeting the kind of crypto native class. So I'm interested in the opportunity you see there.
So when I joined the Solana ecosystem in 2020, that decentralized NASDAQ vision was the core North Star for the entire ecosystem. But what started to take off was digital art. It was NFT communities. And there was this question mark, which was like, well, when do we actually get to that point of being able to bring on these types of institutional assets to the chain? But in hindsight, it makes perfect sense that you would need to first build the social layer of the ecosystem, have enough capital, onboarded users and consumers for the technology to be proven out, for these contracts to really be battle tested over time, because there are audits, but then there's just like time, right? Like these contracts being more trusted over time because it's been years and they're open source and people have really had a chance to kick the tires. And so all of that has then made this moment possible where we're bringing equities on chain, we're bringing IP on chain. And so I do think that requires founders to really be able to elevate and be able to talk to both audiences. But that's also what makes Breakpoint so special, is you see all of that coming together. And I think if you were to start a chain and just be like, we're just going to focus on the institutional audience, and I think you end up pretty limited because it's having both the cultural impact and the consumer appeal and applications and these real world assets all composable in the same community and ecosystem that makes that economy really work and take off.
How are you thinking about your positioning within this increasingly competitive set?
Well, it's true. Like, I was here earlier for Finance Week. So, it's like we brought the suits on this trip. I can't remember the last time I did that for a conference. And so, it's having an opportunity to tell this story. And I think for all of us, it's really an opportunity to then take this technology into the mainstream and be advocates for it. And so, where we are differentiated is, we've created more tokens and launched more projects on Solana than any protocol, in the ecosystem. 20 million tokens, over 800 million NFTs. So we've seen a lot of hands. And so we can bring that experience to helping these new players come into the ecosystem. And that's not just a technology problem, like understanding, okay, how do you set up the smart contracts? What are the token economics? What's the launch mechanism? But it's also, how do you do it in a way that's like genuine to the community? Like, who are the teams to talk to? Like, oh, you should go talk to Stepan and the Squads team. Like, you should connect with these DeFi protocols, these wallets, and like, let's go to market with a collaboration of different teams and projects. And so I think that's where we can add a lot of value to people that are looking to come into the Solana ecosystem, is how to get the tech right, how to get the product right, but how to actually land that in the community in a real way.
I've noticed you're very, you're using the word protocol, not launch pad or platform when you kind of describe what you're building. I think there's sort of a lot probably underlying that from a strategic perspective. Can you expand on that in some way?
Yeah, definitely. So this week, yesterday, we announced the Genesis SDK, which provides any application or developer access to the smart contracts for fair launching fully on-chain. And so as we were talking about earlier, our view is we're building the on-chain economy. Like, why aren't we launching these tokens on-chain? Why are they being launched either on centralized exchanges or in paper docs before they're eventually made available to the on-chain economy? And so our vision is that there shouldn't be like one gate that you go through. Like we don't want to be like, hey, like this is the only path where you can come through, or that there's like one product experience or one type of asset that's going to succeed. And so, we're looking forward to a world where the largest centralized exchanges in the world are doing on-chain drops and are sponsoring and are fighting for projects and like bidding for the opportunity to be part of those launches. And then, being able to then from there, like take the creative space into all of these different asset classes and create some of these closed loop social experiences or product platforms.
I love this vision of exchanges fighting for assets and founders rather than the other way around. Like that is such a huge shift if you think about the sort of underlying structure of how these assets come out. I mean, Stepan, I'm curious how you sort of see the competitive set, because again, you have a lot of different products, but you're also like living in, I mean, probably 2 or 3 of like the most popular narratives out there right now: stable coins, neobanks, the shift that those are driving. So, how are you looking at competition?
I would say we're aware of all the competition, but we're not looking at it too much, right? I think but when I think about Altitude specifically, which is kind of positioning itself as the global business account that any business around the world can leverage to make payments on yield and soon spend their balance on sort of corporate cards, I would say we're not looking sort of within the crypto ecosystem. There's some players that are doing things here and there, but it's very much about you look at Wise and Airwallex and the market share that they have and how they are like, because they're sort of really global first, right? They kind of paved their way with FX, like making that really cheap and streamlined. I think from that perspective, we're definitely looking at kind of those types of businesses as potentially interesting to us to see how their market share looks like and how we can work with that. But at the same time, I also feel like stablecoins allow us to go after customers that probably are not viable economically for Wise, Airwallex, or even Revolut business, right? Because we can scale to multiple geographies and onboard customers with low median float, with low interchange volume, because we are using stablecoins and blockchains, right? Like we can be live in Brazil. Technically we are today, right? And like you can onboard as a Brazilian entity and start using Altitude. We don't need to get licenses, spend 18 months on forging banking partnerships and figuring out how to make this work. And so I think we are actually hoping that with Altitude we can bring sort of the fintech experience that you would expect from a US grade fintech to places where there's just no fintech ecosystem at all, right? And so I think it's about expanding the market, and I know grow the pie is a meme, but I think in this case stablecoins are actually allowing us to do that, right, and make it viable to onboard very different customers than what we would expect today.
What would you say are the biggest blockers to your growth today? Is it kind of education? Does the tech still need to improve?
Actually, I would say the blocker is compliance and risk, because at the end of the day, blockchains are global, stablecoins are global, but accounting standards, reporting standards, taxes, they're all local. And so kind of figuring out how to marry the two systems is probably the most interesting challenge. And some places have developed really well-developed orchestration ecosystems. Like we're seeing, Latin America, Brazil, and Mexico, there's a lot of sort of great ramps that go fiat to stablecoin and back. I think in some places these are just non-existent. And some places have very strict regulations about currency controls, and there's a lot of issues to deal with. And so I would say it's the end goal for us, right, is to get to end-to-end stablecoin settlement. That's how we think of the North Star for sort of stablecoins, like a subset of crypto. That should be our North Star, that we shouldn't need all these intermediaries in the middle. And because right now, if you think about how the stablecoin backed cards work, it's kind of from an infrastructure perspective even worse than a regular card, right? Because you're doing so many hops through so many different intermediaries, there's more fees in the middle, there's more complexity. And so at the end of the day, when I'm buying something, I'm buying a coffee at Breakpoint, it should be just a transfer from one Solana account to another without anything else in the middle. And we're actually pretty close to making that happen. It's just it just will take some time for us to get to that final state.
Yes, Steven, maybe same question to you. What do you think is the biggest blocker to 10xing the number of token launches on Genesis?
Ultimately, I think that the prime mover are incredible founders and teams, and then the bottleneck then is providing the technology that allows you to go end to end through the launch and handle all of the details. And so I think we've actually made, with the announcement this week, this is a really meaningful step forward, which is with a token launch, because the market is so trained to look for the rug, and rightly so. Right. If we really look at the last couple of years, the space has given consumers a lot of reasons to be distrustful. That means that any founder entering into the space has to get everything right. It's the token economics have to be very community forward. You need to get the vesting schedules right. If you're doing an airdrop, you need to think about like the distribution and making sure that you have the right liquidity dynamics. Like, how are you maintaining liquidity on chain? How are you dealing with centralized exchanges? Like, let's get out of this world of having to pay exchanges to list and have them pay the projects for the opportunity to co-market with them. And so I think being able to then manage all of those details in an end-to-end way with trusted contracts and tools so that the founders can really focus on product market fit is the key bottleneck. And then what I think we're also starting to see is blockchains not just being a platform for the crypto native technology, like the infrastructure that's powering the crypto economy itself, but for IRL businesses where their revenues are then being tokenized and then being made available on chain. And so I think, in short, that is the phase shift that we're going through right now, where it's not just DeFi protocols and other types of crypto native assets that are tokenized, but these are revenue streams for every business in the world. And so, kind of one of our memes and mantras is that like tokenizing all revenue is the final meta, that anything that is revenue generating can be tokenized, and giving individuals and capital allocators and consumers and retail and funds the ability to get exposure in the early stage to those projects is what will make blockchains not just the internet capital markets, but capital markets ubiquitous and global.
Okay, great meme. What are some weird examples when you say tokenize all revenue? Like what are like the wildest ideas here that you guys sort of are orienting towards?
Well, I mean, we're really starting to see all sorts of businesses that are tokenizing. You have Reposa, which is here, which is a coffee company, and they have their NFTs that are part of their tokenization. There's some projects floating around. Like I think there's a Realtor.com. I think announced that they're going to be tokenizing.
How did I miss that?
And so, I think we're starting to really see that. And then it's just equities on chain, like the ability to have both private equity and public equities that are trading on chain. And maybe those markets already exist to some extent, but you're bridging those over, and large holders and liquidity providers are starting to bring that. So I think
that's so weird.
That's
basically, that's not so weird. I thought maybe you're saying that there's going to be some like super esoteric type of product out here that we're going to be able to. And I mean, I guess most revenues are coming from businesses anyway, so maybe I was being a little too optimistic there. Anyways, I want to use the last few minutes that we have with you guys to sort of zoom out a little bit, because I think there is. You're both very early. You saw early friction. You tacked that friction and have done a very good job of taking that beachhead and turning that into new advantages. We're also in this time right now where I think a lot of people are feeling kind of uneasy, questioning. We're questioning the value of tokens. Some are questioning the value of crypto. I think maybe more of the more recent converts are having that. I think those are old hats, I think, are feeling very confident in the future. But if we sort of zoom out, look over the next couple of years, are there any obvious friction points or opportunities that get you excited, either for product opportunities or for maybe next inflection points for our space?
So we were talking actually a little bit about this on chat, but I think IP tokenization is one of those interesting markets. And I think for creators, there's the opportunity to have creator tokens that are community tokens that give you access to unique forms of content. But the issue oftentimes is that when a creator or an artist launches a token, they're put into this position where they're constantly like trying to pull a rabbit out of the hat to like continue, and then it becomes a real brand risk, because like forever there are people in your comments being like, why isn't the token going up? And they're like tagging the SEC and the FBI, and it's like, and then the artist never wants to touch crypto again. And so I think we're getting close to being able to really crack that, where we can ground assets in something that's very real and ring fenced, which is like, okay, I'm buying this token and it's giving me exposure to the future cash flows of a creative work. And I think the power of that is really interesting from a fan perspective, because now when you're promoting the artist or you're promoting that IP that you just have a personal affinity to, you're actually seeing the upside of that. And so it's this combination of like the kind of social kind of process of like putting out there like what you value and what you care about, but then also then having the opportunity to be part of the success of that promotion. And so I think we're really looking forward to seeing IP tokenization and the revenues from those creative works be made available to the on-chain economy, and for artists to have an alternative to just selling their catalogs to private equity firms or large record labels and be able to actually finance those creative works directly with their fans. So that's an area I think we're particularly
that's a good tokenized revenue, kind of weirder tokenized revenue example.
Yeah, absolutely. Like all IP that generates revenue can be tokenized and should be tokenized.
You don't have to go do a deal with OpenAI to be relevant in this new Disney future. Big news this week. Anyways, maybe last question for you, Stepan. Stepping into this more institutional space, I'm curious how you look at tokens generally for your project. Is that part of the game plan? Has that thinking changed because of where demand and where your product has gone?
Actually, what you were mentioning just now, talking about tokenizing even private equity, resonates with me a lot from a perspective that I used to do corporate M&A for many years before getting into crypto, and I dealt a lot with off-chain equity and dealing with cap tables. And even now, like when you're running a company, there's all these safes and conversions. It's incredibly messy, right? It's all Excel spreadsheets and Carta at best, and like it's really really inefficient. And tokens are equity V2. It's an amazing technology that like their ledgering is built in. So I think overall, I do hope we get to a place where even if a project doesn't want to have a publicly traded token yet, that by default the equity should be tokenized just because it's just better infrastructure. And I think what you guys are building is kind of exactly taking us towards that future. And I do love the approach to that as like infrastructure first, and then everything kind of is built on top of that. I think from Squad's perspective, we are not making any decisions just yet, but my kind of aspiration in sort of the long run is, as we're seeing now, I think Galaxy just announced here publicly that you can have real equity tokenized on chain. I think they listed first, I think, on the Canadian stock exchange, then they moved to New York, and now they moved to Solana, right? Or at least a portion of that. And so I think when I was getting into crypto in 21, like that was my dream, right? That like we could essentially IPO on chain and have all of that be programmatic and running on these rails. And so I think in the long run, that would be my aspiration. I think there's some still regulatory aspects that we need to clear out, and there's more clarity that we're looking for. But that would, I would say, the sort of the long-term goal. Where also this question would not be about is it this or that, right? That like it will be kind of token and equity will be synergetic and will mean the same thing at some point.
Yeah, I'm interested if that is the case, because I think we're still seeing one of the interesting things when we've had these conversations is how important it is to kind of put definitions in place, because there's so many different points of view and different starting points. And I think much of the conversation right now is, I think, around the idea of companies, tokens, and that tokens representing ownership, equity, etc. And yet there's still like a lot of builders out there building protocols, networks, where the token is actually inherent to the use of that product, and probably will fit under this commodities definition in some way. And so I'm really curious what the language we are going to use will ultimately be, because it feels like token will not be nuanced enough to actually reflect the varying ways that it ultimately is used and the way that we should be thinking about how they're valued.
I think that's right. I think we'll continue to see the growth of crypto commodities, network tokens, protocol tokens that are meaningfully decentralized, but then we'll also see security tokens or startup tokens from a variety of different jurisdictions. I think one of the really interesting dynamics, like from a global markets perspective, is that there is going to be a huge first mover advantage for the first nation state, the first government, to really deregulate their equities markets and allow them to trade permissionlessly without a KYC walled garden that really limits, 90% of the market. I think we're starting to see some progress in the US, but even I think in a best case with clarity, you're likely going to have KYC restrictions on the way that those tokens can transfer. And so you get some benefits from DeFi composability, but you don't have that same permissionless ability to then trade those tokens. Now, what we are also seeing though are these like, X stocks and pre-stocks, which are these like futures and derivatives that are being marketed as tokenized securities. And frankly, like I'm really curious to see how that plays out over the next 6 months, because there's definitely some dissonance, I think, between what you'll hear from people who are following the legal conversation on this closely and what entrepreneurs are doing. And it's not unlike crypto to just be like, we're just going for it, and we're gonna let it.
It's the only reason we're here.
We're gonna let it play out on the field. But that to me is like one of the really interesting things to watch, which is some people are taking that leap of faith that they're building ahead of regulation, but there's still really an open question around how the SEC is going to provide guidance in this area. And they have shown recently that like even with clarity seemingly stuck in the Senate, that they're just going to start putting out guidance to let entrepreneurs move. And even as of like yesterday, we're starting to see some progress there. So I think ultimately, like the entrepreneurs will be able to adapt to that as we work through that gray area. But if a particular place kind of just steps up and is like, our entire equity markets are open and permissionless and can trade anywhere, they're going to have a huge advantage. And so I'm interested to see, how that plays out from a sort of a.
What's your bet on the country?
It could be here, right? I mean, like, obviously like Switzerland, Cayman, Marshall Islands, like there are a few of these places, but I think we really could see a major economy being like, this is the future of finance, and we're going to make a bet that we don't, like basically like these permissions are used as like a geopolitical weapon, as a way of like sanctioning and sort of creating, basically like as a sort of like an international tool. But what you're trading off is the ability to be the center of the future of finance and global capital. And so I think the countries that understand that trade-off and make the right decision, which is going for open capital, are going to be huge beneficiaries.
I love it. The policy advocacy here from Stepan that we have to clip and just send to his comments to various jurisdictions. I agree. I think it's obviously a balancing off of risk there on their part, but I agree the opportunity there is absolutely massive. All right, gentlemen, we have to leave it there. So many other great guests coming on. Really appreciate you guys hopping on. Obviously, some really big announcements out of both of you guys this week. Yeah, we're going to share these clips, man. I think people are going to be excited to see the sort of futures you guys see. And I mean, how do you not get stoked about 2026 if you just start to get a little inside knowledge on what these guys are working on?
It's impossible.
All right, gentlemen, thanks so much for hanging out with us today.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, fellas.
Thanks for having us.
We get to
Thank
chat.
you.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Metaplex. This clip brought to you by Metaplex. Launch tokens and NFTs on Solana and the SVM.